What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Monday, March 12th, 2018, start of a brand new week here. And let's see, getting on into it. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Sam is in our control room today, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. So let's get right on into it. Now, there is a story coming out of Investment Watch blog that basically that former FBI informant who was gathering information on the Russian energy and uranium market, apparently was interviewed by the FBI in Little Rock, Arkansas, as part of an ongoing Bureau investigation into the Clinton Foundation. Now, this is coming from his lawyer. Now, the Democrats are out there saying there's no quid pro quo between Russia and the Clinton Foundation. Well, that's ridiculous. The Uranium One deal. Look at how much money poured into the Clinton Foundation while Hillary was greasing the skids for that one to come on through. So the Democrats basically issued their own memo and said there was no evidence provided. And the lawyer is basically condemning the Democratic memo and the Hill for making what are false allegations. But again, the corporate media, the deep state, they're still covering for Hillary Clinton. And I think we have heard so much that's going on. And again, the fact that Trey Gowdy does not want to go back into the email server scandal, I think reinforces my theory that Hillary Clinton was replaying the 1996 Chinagate scam. She was using her private email server with weak security to deliver foreign U.S. secrets to foreign interests and using that Clinton Foundation to collect and launder the money. And I think probably everybody inside the Beltway understands a scandal of that magnitude would probably bring this government down because it's already very fragile. The American people don't trust this government anymore. They don't trust anything the politicians are saying. They don't trust the corporate media anymore. They're sick and tired of all the wars. They're sick and tired of this crushing economic burden that is on us. And it wouldn't take an awful lot to bring this government down. Now, Tom Fitton is out there, and he's once again sounding, the clarion call. There's more than enough evidence to warrant arrest and prosecution of Hillary Clinton. And part of it is at least 18 classified emails were found on Anthony Weiner's laptop. And this was covered up by the FBI and the Department of Justice and the Department of State for over a year. There's a conspiracy right there to obstruct justice. And all these people should be in court, should be going to jail. Now, WikiLeaks has basically come on out and exposed Michael Isikoff, the reporter at Yahoo who wrote a story that was claimed to corroborate the Christopher Steele dossier, except that Christopher Steele basically gave Isikoff the information. And WikiLeaks is now saying Isikoff is a Hillary Clinton DNC mole. And I'm sure there are plenty of them. Most of the corporate media is extremely liberal. Now, Putin, as you know, is basically saying all this talk about Russian interference in the domestic internal politics of the United States is a lot of nonsense. And he says, you need to be looking at Israel. We just had a demonstration. AIPAC was, their convention was last week. And we got to see this spectacle of our senators and our representatives just bowing and scraping to Israel and saying, yes, whatever you want, you're going to have. AIPAC is clearly interfering with our domestic internal politics. There's no question about it. So why is everybody in the corporate media just all hot and bothered about Russia? Talk about a bias and a slant. Now, Mueller is said to be getting close to a completion of his Trump obstruction probe. Now, on one hand, you've got this Wall Street Journal story where basically Trump's legal team was working with Robert Mueller to reach an early close to the probe. using the possibility of an interview with the president and the implicit threat of Trump simply quashing the probe as leverage to force Mueller into some kind of a deal that would amount to a slap on the wrist. But then the New York Times came out with a story claiming that Donald Trump has hired the lawyer that represented Bill Clinton in his impeachment trial. Now, this is from known Trump whisperer Maggie Haberman, so there may not be anything to it. There's a lot of fake news out there right now. But so far, and again, after all these millions of dollars and all these many months, Mueller has not found anything regarding his original task, which was to document that there was collusion between Russia and the Donald Trump campaign. And he's gone off into the wilderness, and now he's, looking into the Stormy Daniels situation, and, did Trump pay her hush money, and was there a child involved, and so forth. I mean, talk about tabloid-esque, being in the gutter. Mueller is there. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, as you know, Trump does not pull any punches on his Twitter account, and he basically made a comment about how Maxine Waters appears to be a low IQ individual, which is an observation I think a lot of us basically would agree with. And Maxine Waters came on back and said, well, if Mueller doesn't get him, Stormy Daniels will. What kind of an example are these people setting? They're now using porn stars as in their fight with each other. I feel really sorry for young people that are being told that they should grow up to be adults when they see our leaders acting like such children, because they really are. Now, a group of about 50 former Obama administration officials recently formed a think tank called National Security Action, with the stated goal of attacking the Trump administration's national security policies. And the National Security Action plans to pursue typical liberal foreign policy themes such as climate change, challenging Trump's leadership, immigration, allegations of corruption between the president and foreign powers. In other words, they're not giving up, and they're skating dangerously close to insurrection, I think. So let's talk about Elizabeth Warren a little bit. There's been a huge controversy online where Elizabeth Warren has long claimed that she has Native American blood, and it led to some people calling her Pocahontas. But apparently somebody decided to challenge her on that and say, we need a DNA test, to back this up. And they're about, what, 99 bucks? Except during the holidays, they go on sale. And that would settle the matter once and for all. But Warren has been refusing, and the controversy is building and building and building. At this point, pretty much everybody assumes that, like most politicians, she was lying to her constituents for some advantage. And now Warren says that she is dropping plans to run for president in 2020 and basically focusing on being reelected to the Senate end of this year. And this controversy is of such a magnitude, I think it's probably going to last until November. It may actually adversely affect her chances of reelection. Now, let's get on to the war zones. There's a lot of stuff going on here. The U.S. is continuing to escalate in Afghanistan with virtually no public debate. The idea that the government rules with the consent of the governed is well and truly dead. The war machine is rolling on country after country, and they don't care what we the people actually think about it, how tired we are of it, how much it's costing us in blood and dollars. They just want to keep on doing what they're doing, and they expect we'll go on throwing our children and our money onto the designated enemy. Well, we're starting to run out of kids, and we've definitely run out of money. So there is an end to this that's coming that will not be good for the United States of America. Now, over in Syria, the militants' defense has totally collapsed in eastern Ghouta, and it collapsed under pressure of the Syrian Arab Army and its allies, and the militant-held pocket was cut off into two separate parts, divide and conquer. And apparently Russia brokered a deal where the militants in Ghouta are surrendering their arms and able to leave East Ghouta freely. Don't know where they're going, if they're going to be retasked to some other part of the country or to a different country, but they're surrendering their weapons and they're getting ready to leave. Now, according to Damascus, they have reports that Islamists in East Ghouta plan to stage another false flag chemical attack. And Syria's deputy foreign minister is saying this attack will definitely highlight women, possibly children, and then try and pin the blame on Damascus. And he accused the United States government of only wanting to believe the terrorists rather than the legitimate government of Syria. So he says they've received information the militants plan to stage an attack between the districts of Masrabi and Bat Sawa. Tahrir al-Sham terrorists plan to sacrifice several women for this purpose and launch a disinformation campaign. The performance is thought to be scheduled for March 11th. Well, that should have happened yesterday. It may be happening today. Meanwhile, as the militants continue to pull out, the Syrian chemical weapons specialists have recovered 24 tons of toxic chemicals in the areas previously controlled by the militants. And they've also uncovered a chemical weapons laboratory in East Ghouta that was being used by the U.S.-backed forces. All right, we're going to take a phone call now from Rick in Arizona. Aloha, Rick. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Rick, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I hear you now. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I was just thinking Putin's kind of like on my mind. Isn't the word Russian really just code word for the dual Israeli citizen that nobody in Washington, D.C. wants to talk about? Isn't this kind of like a gang war? You got the establishment Jewish community being accosted on by a much more vicious Russian entrenched mafia type Jewish group of people, and they are really kind of like swooping in on their loot. I mean, this is what Cynthia McKinney explained to Kevin Barrett one day on his show, that this Russian crowd that's behind Trump, and this is what she says, is coming in and basically swooping in like an eagle and stealing their loot. And they use the word Russian in replace of the dual Israeli citizen. What do you mean the Russian Jewish mafia?
Well, the dual Israeli citizens are citizens of the United States and of Israel. They're not necessarily Russian. Now, we know that the Russian mob is unfortunately entrenched here in the U.S., but MS-13 makes them all look like choir boys.
I would beg to differ with that, Mike. We're talking about types of people that got PhDs. They're lurking through Wall Street. There's a lot to be done here. This is a situation, in my opinion, that it's just they just want to keep the word what we can't use too often out of the circulation of the media. And the big threat is the Jewish community encroaching on another part of the Jewish community itself.
Well, generally, the Jewish religious identity is they're all the same people, and they generally tend not to go after each other. Their worldview is the rest of the world is there to be plundered. And
that's not how it worked that's not how it worked in the 1930s. If you take a look what happened in the 1930s, the gangster Jews terrorized the honest Jews that were the retailers. Murder Incorporated killed more Jewish people, even though it was Jewish itself. So that is not correct. What we have here is a gang war going on at a level that's above eye level of the American people. And thank you for taking my call.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the call. We're going to let you go. I'm not sure that I agree that it's a gang war, and I don't see it as anybody from Russia, Jewish or otherwise, swooping in to attack U.S. interests. It's quite the other way around. The U.S. is clearly the aggressor. It has been all along. And Russia doesn't want a war with us. China doesn't want a war with us. Nobody wants a war, except the United States military-industrial complex. Now, the U.S. is starting to increase airstrikes in Libya. They say they're going after ISIL. We don't know exactly what's really going on over there. But again, they're dealing with a situation in which the installed puppet rulers are running up against some serious opposition from the people of Libya who want their own country back. Over in Lebanon, the deputy chief of Hezbollah, Sheikh Naim Qassem, asserted that his Shia organization will shield Lebanon from any U.S. or Israeli schemes to destroy the countries. Qassem said that the Hezbollah contributes to Lebanon's strength and stability. The group is a pillar in the country. Contrary to reporting in the Western media, Hezbollah is an integral part of empowering institutions, shaping the future, maintaining independence, and preventing the Israeli occupying regime. And that's why the U.S. and Israel are trying to get rid of them. It's like Iran's nuclear weapons or North Korea's nuclear weapons. They're trying to strip countries of the ability to resist invasion in order to invade them. The pattern has repeated so many times, it's just incredibly obvious. Now, over at the United Nations Human Rights Commission, they've issued a report basically saying the illegal settlements that Israel has in the West Bank constitute a war crime. The transfer of civil population by an occupying state into an occupied territory is a grave breach of Article 147 of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Of course, we all know that, and we all know that Israel thinks it is above the law, and that any law that gets in the way was probably written by a bunch of Jew-hating anti-Semites who want Hitler to come back and gas Jewish babies in the ovens. Now, Dr. Ron Paul has been looking at this kerfuffle, if you will, where Congress is trying to reassert its constitutional control over the war-making authority of this country. And they're making Yemen an issue, saying that the president can't just go into any country he feels like without Congress issuing a declaration of war or some kind of authorization. And Ron Paul is saying that as far as he can tell, the Pentagon is going to ignore Congress no matter what they do. So Congress has been hamstrung. They're no longer the authority they used to be. They no longer have the oversight over the executive branch they're supposed to have. That's why we have the three branches of government as checks and balances on each other. But in the Pentagon's view, they work for the president and they don't care what the Congress is saying. Congress is too busy davening to Israel anyway. Now, over in Iran, their foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, has pledged the Islamic Republic's utmost efforts to help people in the two war-ravaged countries of Syria and Yemen. And he's not talking military, he's talking about humanitarian aid, because none is getting in there. And especially in Yemen, the Saudi blockade is, people are literally starving to death, and that's a terrible, terrible way to go. And so far, this Saudi proxy war on behalf of the United States has killed more than 13,600 people in Yemen and led to this humanitarian crisis. All right, we're going to take another phone call. Peter in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I just wanted to expand upon your previous caller who was talking about the organized crime thing. And he was right about Murder Incorporated being, it was Jewish, and they did kill, well, one of the guys may have just killed 500 people. His name was Pittsburgh Phil Strauss, just one of their assassins. They say could have killed as many as 500 people. But nevertheless, during Murder Incorporated and the syndicate, they became, the syndicate was Lucky Luciano, as I'm sure you know, and
yes,
the Mafia, but also was Meyer Lansky, Bugsy
yes,
Siegel. The point is, Meyer Lansky was the finance, right?
yes,
And Murder Incorporated was the muscle.
yes.
And if you've got the finance and the muscle, you control it. And I would tell you what his point about the Russian mafia was, you know, about the Jackson Amendment. How you told me about the Jackson Amendment on the air. When all those Russian Jews were allowed to emigrate, they became, a lot of them were criminals. A lot of them became the oligarchs.
Yes,
and they teamed up with the oligarchs later. Yeah.
Peter, we got to do a commercial. Stay on the line. I'm going to come right back to you after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And if you would like to help Republic Broadcasting stay on the air, and folks, we really do need it. We're not kidding about any of this. This is serious stuff. We need your help. to stay in this war against the corporate media. And if you can donate by check or money order, the postal address is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number, if you want to pledge to be a recurring subscriber, is 800-724-2719, extension 03. The network thanks you. All right, we're going back to Peter in Los Angeles. We were talking about organized crime, the Russian gangs, and yeah, it's certainly historically true that while Hollywood always portrays the gangland of the 1920s and 30s as primarily Italian, that there were quite a few Jews in very powerful positions. Mayor Lansky, obviously, everybody knows about him.
Well, again, the head of Murder Incorporated, and Murder Incorporated, the organization itself was mostly Jewish. That was the muscle part of organized crime. The finance part, if you control the muscle and the finance, Mike, you control organized crime.
Yes.
And since they also control the media, you hear only about the Italians, really, pretty much. But I want to make one point. One of the things you pointed out and kind of opened my eyes to was when you say that the banks are organized crime, and they are.
Yes.
And so when you think about it that way, that they've matriculated upwards into the banking arena. And then remember, a couple of years ago, there was all the organs, that ring of organ smuggling and ecstasy people in New Jersey, the mayors of New Jersey and governor. Remember that?
Yes, I remember that one.
There was Israel controlled. Well, the Mossad is big time into organ trafficking, and they're also big time into ecstasy trafficking. And then also remember when they found out that Converse Info Systems and that other company, Amdocs,
yes,
when they were tapping at criminals, and they found out that the criminals were being tipped off.
Yes.
Remember?
Yeah, that's how they blew that whole Israeli spy scandal wide open, is that the Israeli gangs were smuggling the ecstasy in, and the police were setting up raids to catch them, and apparently their pager message traffic was being eavesdropped on by Converse Infosys, and the word was getting back to the drug gangs.
Right, and now, Mike, because they've got all the intercepts of everybody, and not only phone, they can do it to everybody, and so that guy was right. It's just moved. It's organized crime on a massive and much higher level, include the banks and the same stuff that they used to do with
the
just
government itself. Look at what Hillary and Bill Clinton have gotten away with for the last 30 years. They're trying to hide it from the American people, but I think the entire federal government has become totally corrupt, and it is operating like an organized crime ring. Washington, D.C. isn't our nation's capital. It's a crime scene.
I absolutely agree with you, but I just want to point out that Jewish-Israeli thing, because they've got those intercepts, and what they were doing back when they only had Converse and Amdocs, they're doing now with everybody, and they've also got the central banks and everything else. So it's true. I mean, it's on a much higher level than the thuggish Italians or MS-13 or what have you. And you're right about the U.S. government, too. They're completely dirty.
All right. So, well, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go. And, okay, I have to respond to an emergency email here. Somebody wrote in to say that they can't see my website, but it seems to be working from here. But I would not be surprised if some ISPs start to block truther websites. I mean, that's how completely out of control the censorship has become. It's wide out in the open. Okay. Yeah, okay. All right, something's going on. I'm getting a whole bunch of emails saying the What Really Happened website is coming up, page not found. And like I said, it's working from here, but I don't know what's going on, if it's a DNS issue or something. We'll have to look at it on the next commercial break. Now then, apparently when Donald Trump met with Benjamin Netanyahu Trump informed Netanyahu that the U.S. will pull out of the Iran P5+1 deal unless significant changes are made, meaning they want to throw a bunch of Iran's longer-range missiles onto the ban list as well. I don't think Iran's going to go for that. I don't think Iran's going to go for that because the U.S. is obviously not negotiating in good faith. The original deal was made. Iran has stuck to it. The U.S. less so. And a deal like that, it's a contract. You're not supposed to go back in and say, oh, by the way, we also meant to do thus and such and thus and such. So apparently that's what's happening there with Iran. All right, we're coming up on another commercial break, and I'm going to go try a laptop and see if my site is reachable from that. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and we're talking about the war zones, what's going on over there. And retired Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, who was the former Chief of Staff to Secretary of State Colin Powell, is basically out there warning us that Israel is dragging the United States into what could potentially be World War III. Now, Israel obviously wants us to go to war against Iran, against Lebanon. They want Syria brought under control. They want Assad out. They're starting to see Turkey as a threat as well. And yeah, when you ignite an entire region there and you go after a country with strong ties economically to Russia, we're on the tightrope here. One misstep, and it's going to be all over. Now, for some reason, the director of the Central Intelligence Agency is out there saying that the U.S. refuses to make any concessions before the North Korea talks. Now, I find that rather unusual. Statements like that should come from either the White House or the Department of State. And I'm wondering if the CIA is trying to mess things up with the possibility of the Koreas reuniting. But something is going on in the background if the CIA director is making these kind of foreign policy statements. Now, a lot of people are still talking about these new weapon systems that Putin unveiled during his State of the Union speech. And it was clearly a message sent to the West. And the message was a simple one. Nuclear war is unthinkable. Please stop thinking about it. And so the political implications are that the United States no longer enjoys a strategic supremacy in these kinds of weapons. We've returned to the days of mutually assured destruction, which held off nuclear attack, except for 1 or 2 accidental close calls. But our government just doesn't seem to be getting that message. Of course, the military-industrial complex, it's another sales pitch. Oh, look what Russia's got. We've got to get the same thing. More money. We've got to have more money. Why don't you start with that missing $8 trillion that disappeared into the Pentagon? That would buy you some nice stuff here. Now, the CIA and the Pentagon have come on out basically dismissing Putin's claims as a bluff. They're saying that Russia's weapons are years away from reality. Yet Russia test-fired one of them over this last weekend. They put out a video about it, this hypersonic missile. Now, the CIA, remember, has had some very bad intelligence goofs in the past. They missed the fall of the Soviet Union. They missed the Soviet Union going into Afghanistan. They were seriously wrong in their estimations about when China was going to get nuclear weapons by years. So they're getting a little bit reckless here in their desire to just get this war going. Because Putin doesn't need a lot of these. If you look at the descriptions of them, he only needs a few. And they will change They'll change the picture dramatically here. Russia's not the only one whose weapons we need to worry about. China has a missile, the DF-21D. It is the fastest missile in the world. It is too fast to be intercepted by any of our current defensive systems. It's being described as a carrier killer, meaning aircraft carriers are rapidly becoming obsolete. The Navy doesn't want to say that. They're clinging to their aircraft carriers as fiercely today as they cling to the battleships going into World War II. The aircraft carriers were nice to have, but the battleships, those are the mainstay. That's how the engagements will be fought, just slugging it out. World War II changed their thinking. World War III will probably change their thinking about aircraft carriers if we survive. Now, as you know, there's been a lot of talk when people talk about Ukraine, that Ukraine needs to take Crimea back, or the U.S. needs to take Crimea away from Russia and give it back to Ukraine. And Putin is saying, no, that's not going to happen. The people of Crimea voted to merge with Russia. They are now part of the Russian republics. And Putin is not going to tolerate that anymore than if somebody came on up and basically said, we're going to take Florida. Now, a lot of people have been talking about this internet hero, Q, and I've looked at some of his comments. It's claimed he's got a tremendous success rate. He's being promoted by a lot of people. And he came out with a post recently in which he went down a whole bunch of things, including the claim that Angela Merkel is Adolf Hitler's daughter. And that's been floating around the web for a while. Unfortunately, that story is a hoax. It was made up in 2007 by the infamous Saoirse Fall, who is a known provider of disinformation on the internet to make us all look kooky. All right, let's talk about the economic news here. It does look like a trade war is coming. Trump has put his tariffs in place on steel and aluminum. And a lot of people are saying that this could actually have a negative effect on our already fragile economy. And we could actually see a major stock market correction, if not an outright crash. And even the plunge protection team wouldn't be able to stop it. Now, China is accusing the United States of fabricating trade data and warns a trade war would be a disaster, and it would be for everybody. Notice how we've gone from free trade around the globe to trade wars. And I understand that trade has to be balanced, and that's a big problem with our trade imbalance. It's a major drain on our economy, and we do need to find ways to revive manufacturing. But I think tariffs are a short-term Band-Aid only. And that what we really need to be focusing on is, first of all, giving our kids a real education in science, math, engineering, electronics, physics, so that we have a trained workforce to start going into high-tech again. And we need to find the next big thing, the next technological revolution. That's why I'm in favor of Trump's revival of our civilian space program. Because look at all the wonderful things that came out of the Apollo moon missions. It fueled the tech boom of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And then our corporate leadership very foolishly just let that technology go to other countries. And those countries aren't going to, let it come back. They're manufacturing powerhouses. China especially, there's still a problem with intellectual property over there. They copy things that we've invented. We need to develop technology and manufacturing that only we can do, that other nations won't be able to copy. We need to leapfrog ahead. We can't just play catch-up anymore. What is going to be the next big thing? In computers, it's probably going to be photonics. And I don't know that there's a lot of work being done on that. The existing chip companies want to cling to their silicon technology. They don't want to have to retool and revamp. But it's going to happen someday. The advantages of photonics are amazing. Less power consumption, no heat generated, much smaller components, no radio frequency interference. It really is going to be the wave of the future, and I would like to see the United States leading that wave. Story out of Global Research up in Canada. More non-existent U.S. job growth reported, and they're basically calling out the Bureau of Labor Statistics, saying the numbers don't make sense. When you look at the numbers versus other indicators, they're not making sense. Of course, we know that they've been lying about the true jobless numbers in this country for years. Our real unemployment rate is 30%, more than 30%. That's even worse than it was during the Depression of the 1930s. You think all these homeless people living in these tent cities are doing it because they like outdoor life? Not in the winter. Now, the Saudis are being accused of using coercion and abuse to seize billions from their nation's richest people, which, if you're going to start confiscating wealth, confiscate it from the people who've got the wealth. So that part sounds good. But apparently, some of these businessmen, they're under house arrest, they're wearing ankle bracelets, and they're saying basically they're being beaten and coerced into confessing to crimes they've never committed, at which point the Saudi government takes half their wealth. And I understand why the Saudi government is doing that, because the Saudi government is broke. They really got slammed by that misguided oil price war against Russia. That caused a lot more damage to the rest of the world than it did to Russia itself. Saudi Arabia is now out there flinging weapons at other countries and getting ready to assert more regional dominance. They're getting buddy-buddy with Israel. So they needed the money. I wonder if when our economy starts to go downhill, if our government will do the same thing. Just start going after the billionaires. Now, Theresa May is out there insisting that Russia was behind this nerve gas attack on this former Russian spy, which also hit his daughter and about 21 other people. She has no evidence for it whatsoever. We just know it. We saw it in our crystal ball. Well, frankly, knowing the Russians, if they'd been behind it, one and only one person would have died. The target. Whoever did this, very, very sloppy. Very sloppy, very inexperienced. But Theresa May is out there calling for a full spectrum of sanctions on Russia. So more sanctions are coming. Goad the Russian bear. The British media is restarting their propaganda campaign for regime change in Russia. And again, they're starting with the alleged poisoning of this former Russian double agent, Sergei Skripal. And it's basically triggered the Russophobic corporate media to go into overdrive, especially in The Guardian, where they're just out there screaming about a weapons lab that might not even exist anymore. But that's what the corporate media is doing. They're selling us a war with Russia. We don't want a war with Russia. Inevitably, it will go nuclear. Nasty stuff. All right, let's talk about the economic news here. Our stock market is currently in bubble territory. Despite market forces, the plunge protection team keeps shoving it up and up and up. The market is way overvalued, and it's clearly in bubble territory, and it's not going to take much to prick that bubble and make it burst. Back in 2008, high gas prices is what pricked that bubble. So it's very fragile. And ITR's Alan Bellew is saying to prepare for a second half slowdown and a mild 2019 recession. So all the financial experts are saying the bull market is over, the bear market is here, and things are going to get tough. And you need to plan accordingly. Now, up in Toronto, up in Canada, their real estate bubbled up hugely. They were saying 30% price increase year over year average. And less people are buying the homes. 41.2% less people were buying detached homes in Toronto. 10% more people are buying condos. And it looks like that bubble is bursting. Now, despite the sanctions, Russian food exports are expected to double by 2025. All these sanctions are working against the globalists. Russia's agricultural industry is totally self-sufficient, totally domestic, totally contained, and they've got plenty left over to sell to other countries. And other countries are going to want to buy these products because they're GMO-free. Quite a far cry from the days of Lysenkoism and mass starvation in the former Soviet Union. They're doing really well. Absolutely. Now, Lawrence Solomon has an interesting theory about Trump's tariffs. He says the real reason for Trump's steel tariffs is that he needs to build up our domestic steel production ability ahead of war. We can't be dependent on other nations for steel if the supply chains get threatened by war, or if we wind up actually going to war with the countries we're currently buying iron ore from or steel from. And he's saying that's the real reason. Makes sense also for aluminum. A lot of aluminum gets used in weapons of war, especially aircraft. We've got to have domestic ability to produce that. So another indicator, we are on the road to a major, major war. I mean, we're already at war with so many countries. Apparently, Lloyd Blankfein is leaving or being kicked out of Goldman Sachs, and CNBC is saying that his replacement has already been named. So there's going to be a changing of the guard over there at Goldman Sachs. This one is a little bit scary. Over at the Washington Compost, they have this writer, a millennial columnist, saying it's time to give socialism a try. And we know liberals are socialists at heart. No surprise there. But to actually think about turning the United States into a communist nation, that's a little scary. The article is basically saying what's wrong with this country is capitalism. No, we're not a capitalist country any longer. We have sunk down into fascism. We should bring capitalism back because it worked while there were reasonable controls and restrictions on the ultra-rich and the big banks. Capitalism does work. Under communism, people just don't have incentives to go on out and achieve. All right, we got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to take some phone calls now, starting with John in Georgia. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha. I just wanted to say something about the Bitcoin and how it's kind of faded a little bit from the headlines. And I've been following it for a while, trying to figure out why no new Bitcoins have been issued in quite a while. And it came to my attention that in December, a whole slew of the Bitcoin mining machines in Iceland were stolen.
Yes.
And right after the price fell and fell and fell, all these machines were stolen, and then all of a sudden it stabilizes. So now it's staying in that 8,000 to 11,000 range. And I'm wondering who stole all the mining machines, you know? And how come no new Bitcoins have been issued probably since end of October or beginning of November? Do you have any insight on that?
Well, no, I don't. We did have an article last week where some financial institutions are trying to suppress the price of Bitcoin by basically acquiring huge numbers of them and then dumping them on the market all at once. And it's just another variation of efforts by the bankers and stock exchanges to keep the price of gold down, to discourage people from closing their savings account, emptying their portfolios, and getting into metals as wealth preservation, which is a good thing to do. Unfortunately, Bitcoin is not suitable for wealth preservation because it's not based on a commodity of any kind. Its value is just entirely what people are willing to pay for it. And I know a lot of places are starting to have laws against cryptocurrencies. They just passed one here in Hawaii, which is why I can't take donations that way any longer. So it is too easy to manipulate. And I don't imagine that the people who stole those machines did so for any other purpose than mining cryptocurrency. Maybe they're not doing Bitcoin. Maybe they've switched to one of the other cryptos that are out there.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm just thinking, but who had this happened all within a couple, 3 days. I think it was something upwards of 6,000 machines are stolen by somebody in Iceland, and they have to take them somewhere. I mean, I don't think they can just set them up in that environment again, even though it's an optimal environment. At the same time, Iceland is complaining about, I think, more than 50% of their electricity was being used by these miners.
Yes.
So maybe Iceland just kind of looked the other way and let somebody come in and solve their problem for them. So.
Well, Iceland didn't need to do that. Iceland could simply pass a bill saying that if you're going to have crypto mining computers, you've got to find a way to power them yourself because the infrastructure can't handle it. That's become a big problem in a lot of places where cryptos are being mined. It uses huge amounts of electricity.
Yes, of course it became, and when the price point of the Bitcoin is below, I was assuming that the Bitcoins weren't being released because maybe it had to hit 14,000 or whatever it was to pay their bills and for it to be profitable. So, I mean, it's just there's so many ways to control this. I mean, it's not even just turning off the electricity can turn off the miners. So anyway, I just thought I'd bring that out there.
Well, thanks an awful lot. We got to take another break here for station identification. When we come on back, we've got more callers waiting on the line, and we'll do that after these words from our network. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And the whatreallyhappened.com website is up and running. It was a temporary glitch. I don't even know what happened, but everybody wrote back in and said they can see it now. So stray cosmic ray, I guess. Let's go back to the phones here. PJ Barden in the United Kingdom. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good evening. I won't delay you at all, Michael. As usual, you're right on the money regarding that nerve agent poisoning. But it took place in Salisbury, where that Russian guy lives, 120 miles southwest of London. And guess what else is based in Salisbury? The Porton Down Bioweapons Laboratory. Isn't that just a coincidence?
Oh, there's a coincidence. Right? I'm sure it's just a coincidence. Absolutely just a coincidence.
Absolutely, but the media won't touch that, and I'll be very brief. The Downing Street and the British press mouthing off basically the press releases of the State Department. That's the kind of coverage we're getting here. But it stinks to high heaven. Putin would want to be out of his mind to pull that off right now at the height of this propaganda against him. But there you are. Just that's all I have to say.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And yeah, it's an obvious false flag, just like they're doing down in Syria, only on a smaller scale. And yeah, they're just trying to push us toward a war with Russia. I don't want to go. I don't want there to be a war with Russia. I mean, I'm too old to serve in the armed forces, obviously. But if this war goes nuclear, this island is going to get hit. And if they nuke my Hyundai, I'm going to be really, really ticked off. All right, let's go on over to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Yeah, war's coming, Mike. I watched the House of Commons with Theresa May. Wretched piece of garbage. All those people all reading off a script saying our democracy's at risk. And I noticed Theresa May, she kept bringing up multiple times how it's a threat to the basically the current world order. This is what it's about. We have no leadership anymore, Mike. We're destabilized. We got no adults running this country anymore. Mm-hmm. They mouth off. They're stupid. You know, they're stupid, and there's no anti-war protest going on. Remember during the 80s, there was a lot of protests in Germany about nukes being there, and there's nothing going on anymore to stop this crap. Now, I think we're moving toward it, Mike. You got to watch Theresa May and just listen to all them, all reading off cue cards and scripts, like the gentleman said, right from the State Department script. You know. It's inevitable, Mike. It scared the crap out of me. You have to listen to this crap. I'm like, these people are taking us to the brink, Mike. Like,
we're at the brink. We are already at the brink. Now, the absence of protesters in the street doesn't mean that people aren't interested. People were doing protests in the street when we first went into Iraq, and of course, there was no media coverage. The media coverage went to the pro-war rallies that were all staged, but the protesting has gone virtual. It's people networking with each other over their smartphones and their tablets, and they're getting together there to basically say, this is a terrible thing that's going on. The only reason these days to have a demonstration out in public is to make a media statement. But if you know the media is not going to pay any attention to you to begin with, it's kind of a why bother moment. That's why we see more and more of these protests in the news are themselves staged. There are companies that will simply get together, or rent a mob, and say, here's what you're going to scream about. And that's why so many times there's been this embarrassment where a reporter will go up to somebody and say, why are you protesting about this? And you get the immediate deer in the headlight look. They don't know. They were given something to say, and they were paid to say it, plus a box lunch. And that was basically it. So it's all media manipulation. But I think the real protest, the American people, the grassroots, has gone virtual. It's in cyberspace.
It's just, even like they did the same thing we did over here. People got to not watch RT. We need to make it a law. RT is Russian propaganda. They were saying how our politicians need not to go on these shows. So it's the same playbook. And Mike, this poisoning of it's obviously the same group of people that was behind the Ukraine coup right during the Sochi Olympics start, right? Yep. And then shooting down the plane in Ukraine, and all this on and on and on and on. Russia hacked the election. Crap. It's just this. It's a build-up. You know what I mean? It's a build-up to the inevitable, Mike. I mean, I don't know what else to say at this point. They're crazy.
It's very obvious. It's very heavy-handed. We can all see it. We're just waiting for a moment of sanity to break through some of our leaders in Washington, D.C., or failing that, a decent-sized asteroid to hit, which would be a shame because there's a lot of really nice museums in Washington, D.C. I've never seen, and I would like to.
The guy who got poisoned also, remember this, the World Cup's coming up, and where is that at? It's in Russia. So you see this constant egging on, and they're going to put more sanctions on and on. You know what, Mike? I think Russia should, after this election coming up in a few days, cut the gas off to parts of Europe. That's it. Cut it off. That's how I feel about it. Cut them off. They want to freeze, they can freeze, because he's going to have to drop the hammer sooner rather than later. I said that before, because you're going to keep letting sanctions get put on. I know they're doing better with the agriculture, but it's just an egging on, and you keep going and bullying, and to a point where you're going to have to react.
Well, Putin is well advised not to react. He understands he's a chess player. He understands, they're trying to provoke him. And all these sanctions mean that Russia can't do business with the U.S. and its allies, which are not the entire world. Russia's still doing a lot of business with China and other countries that aren't part of the Western world. And all we're really doing is we're harming our own economies by cutting us off from that commerce. Because those are countries that grow things and manufacture things. And our country just believes that if they take a bunch of money and shake it back and forth rapidly, it'll grow. And it doesn't work that way.
But if they don't like Russia so much, then don't take their gas. Don't take their gas.
Well, Russia's already shut off the gas to Ukraine over that treaty dispute and unpaid balance. Even though the International Court of Arbitration actually ruled against Russia, which was obviously politically motivated. But if Putin were to shut off the gas to Europe in violation of the contract, that would immediately be declared an act of war.
Yeah, but they put sanctions on Russia. Isn't that an act of war? Isn't sanctions an act of war?
It's an act of economic war. But Putin doesn't want to escalate it. He's playing statesman again. He's trying to keep things under control and not get out of hand. Because he understands, like most of us do, if this war really gets going, on the day the U.S. government realizes it cannot win a conventional war against Russia and or China and all the other places we're currently stuck in, they're going to start turning the keys on those missile silos. And Putin doesn't want to see that happen. It's bad for everybody.
All right, thanks, Mike. I hate to be a big bummer on this issue, but I see it coming a mile away, Mike. It's a train coming at us.
I know. I see the same thing. I see the same thing. All right. Thank you for the call. We're going to let you go. We're going to do a shout out now to our Honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Trump has issued a warning to the mayor of Oakland, California, saying that she could be arrested under Title VIII, and that she'd better think very carefully about what she's been doing, or she's going to get a long time to think about it behind bars. So Trump is, at least in this area, starting to put on those presidential brass knuckles. Now, over in New York, the New York Police Department is saying they won't arrest illegal immigrants unless they break a law. Duh, they already did. Just by being on U.S. soil, they have committed a crime. And I would think that the New York Police Department, more than anybody else, because they're out on the streets, they're seeing the damage being done to the streets, the stress on the infrastructure, the increased crime by all these illegal immigrants. And you'd think that maybe they would be on the side of getting the city cleaned up. Just round up the illegal immigrants, get those punkin' chunkin' boys there with their air cannons, just start shooting them back over that border into Mexico. Longest distance and highest bounce wins the prize. Now, amazingly enough, the Democrats appear to be ready to make abolishing the immigration and customs enforcement, just take it away completely, shut it down. They're going to make that an issue for their 2020 campaign. Clearly, they are pandering to and dependent on the illegal immigrant votes. And we know that they voted in the millions, and they're going to do it again in November, and they're going to do it again in 2020. Illinois have been caught, in Illinois, illegals get driver's licenses, and they use them to register to vote, and they vote. 5 people were indicted on felony charges of illegal voting and petition gathering. The illegal voters were not only illegal immigrants, but some voted multiple times. So yes, the illegal immigrants are voting. They got 5 of them out of how many million? We don't really know. We keep hearing the number 12 million, but we've been hearing that for a long time. They're still coming across the border. We don't really know how many illegal immigrants there are. We do know that the illegals are, somebody somewhere is paying to transport these illegals to other parts of the country. My guess is into districts that are just slightly GOP, to change the demographics, to turn them back into the blue. Over in Great Britain, police have launched a hate crime investigation. Apparently somebody was mailing out these obviously professionally printed letters asking them to carry out attacks on Muslims in April. It was advertised as Punish a Muslim Day, and obviously the police are looking into this. But it's the open borders policy that has led to all this stress and tension and hostility. It was a bad idea to begin with. But I guess politicians are taking Soros money. They're going to take his direction. They're going to do what he says. Open the borders. We're going to blend all these people together, and they're going to stand around there in multicultural bliss and hug and hug and hug. Didn't really work out that way. For very well-known reasons. Clash of cultures, different religions, outright xenophobia. You can't just make that all go away. A lot of these migrants that have come to Europe are very angry. They were apparently promised all kinds of free stuff, which they didn't get. And now they're angry. They've gone a very long distance to get to Europe, and they're acting out. Some of them are have no choice but to turn to crime just to stay alive. Now, as you know, the EU is still reeling from the results of Italy's recent elections, where the Eurosceptic parties won. They're all out there trying to say, oh, this was Russia. Russia interfered in the Italian elections. Europeans love the EU. Europeans love open borders. Europeans love Brussels. No, they don't. And apparently, the real surprise were the young people of Europe. Now, during the Brexit debate, it was assumed that that support for Brexit would be among the elderly who remembered what Britain was like before the EU and wanted to go back to there. And the assumption was that the young voters, well, they basically, being part of Europe is the reality of their whole lives. They don't have that memory of a different Great Britain before the EU. But apparently the young people of Europe are waking up, and they're definitely voting anti-EU. So just waiting for the old people to die off is not going to reverse Brexit here. All right, let's talk about some of our recent staged shootings, gun grabber, holidays, whatever. Another one of the survivors of the Route 91 massacre, the Mandalay Bay shooting, reported seeing there were several drones overhead before the shooting began. Somebody was watching them remotely. This was Michael Gogun, and he was quoted in the Montana newspaper the day after the shooting. He'd seen some drones in the air and thought fireworks were going off from the drones when the shooting started. In fact, they even identified the drone. It's a A-160 Hummingbird unmanned aerial vehicles. Or they think that's what it might have been. That's serious drone stuff. That's police type stuff. That's not a hobbyist drone like I've got on the back window there. Now, over the weekend, Broward County Sheriff's Department basically released the audio of the police calls from the beginning of the school shooting. And it has put Scott Peterson in hot water. As you know, Scott Peterson was the deputy sheriff assigned to the school as the safety officer who did not go in and confront the shooter. And when he was asked about it, he basically came out and he said he thought the shooter was somewhere outside. And that's why he didn't bother entering the building. But on the police radio recording, he clearly says that the shooting is from inside Building 12. So he's already been caught in a lie. And serious questions are being asked, which nobody in the government wants to answer at this particular point. Now, remember earlier I was saying there was this columnist at the Washington Compost saying, we ought to try communism in this country. Well, apparently the Communist Revolutionary Student Front at the University of Texas in Austin vandalized a fountain there and is calling for violence, saying it's the necessity of organizing women for revolutionary violence on International Women's Day. It's amazing, just amazing. All right, story out of the Daily Mail. The internet will be weaponized at scale by criminals unless Google and Facebook are better regulated, warns the web inventor Sir Tim Berners-Lee. And he's basically out there saying that Google and Facebook are just running rampant over First Amendment rights of freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. And he says the power is getting too concentrated. And they're running rampant over the web. And the problem is going to get worse because this small handful of companies control which ideas and opinions are seen and shared. What was once a rich selection of blogs and websites has been compressed under the powerful weight of a few dominant platforms. And he's absolutely right about that. He's absolutely right. Basically, these social media sites are set up to be people catchers. instead of people going on out and searching for what they want themselves, they go to Google. And Google doesn't give you all the items that match your search. They're filtering. They don't want you to see what's going on in certain parts of the internet, which is why you need to use a search engine that is more respectful of the First Amendment. You need to use a search engine that is unconnected with Google. There's a lot of small search engines that are actually front doors with advertising that use the Google search system. And you have to be careful about that because you're still going to get the same filtered results. Yandex has been working really well for me. But at this point, the social media corporations are just as corrupted and controlled as the corporate media is on the television set. Now, Ted Cruz is out there wagging his finger at Twitter. And we'll have more about that when we come back from these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to take a phone call now from Curtis in Nevada. Aloha, Curtis. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Listen, I'm looking at CNN right now, and they got two things they're reporting that are very encouraging. Number one, that Trump is not going along with this the thing that happened in England or Syria, and CNN is reporting it as a negative thing, that maybe he's pro-Russia or pro. But the better part is that the Mueller investigation is coming to a close. Did you see that already?
Yeah, I did, and we commented on it, and they're saying that, if Mueller doesn't actually have a charge against Donald Trump, it's going to just confirm that this whole thing was a sham from beginning to end.
Right. It's interesting, too, because I've been listening to a lot of these QAnon people that are literally line by line translating, the code, or saying, look, people like Corsi, who I consider quite credible, and they were saying that as of yesterday, there were going to be actual arrest and actual, they were going to proceed with this thing, which will turn into military tribunals. And I haven't seen anything on it, and I was quite disappointed. Maybe this might be something about it. I don't know. But Mike, honestly, we have to have all this started by the end of the summer, because we have to show the people how dirty these people are. Otherwise, they might vote. We need to get the vote this fall, to reinforce Trump's agenda.
Well, we also have to fix the election system as well, because we know the Democrats were cheating. And they were cheating in the primaries, and they cheated in the general election. And I imagine they're just going to double down and cheat that much harder in November, because that's just the way the Democrats like to play. They can't win in the battlefield of ideas. And so, yeah, we got to fix that.
But, if Sessions doesn't start, now that this investigation is over, now Trump can go ahead and fire him and get somebody that can actually do the job.
Well, I would love to see Larry. I would love to see Larry Klayman in that position as Attorney General.
Right. Mike, I think I know a good reason why. You got California and its governor and the Oakland mayor, and Chicago with Eric Holder, and his UN mob, and Denver. All these states are blue states. And to me, what I'm looking at is that these people actually, in their mind, they no longer consider the U.S. government relevant. They actually see themselves as a corporation, and the UN is part of that corporation, and they're actually ready to start going under the United Nations. Because after all, for the last 20, 30 years, you've had the UN working its way into these cities with their sister city programs, their strong city programs, now the resilient city programs, right?
Yes.
And to me, I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing that these Democrats were on board with this whole UN takeover after Hillary came on, and when it didn't happen, they still want to try to implement it.
Oh, well, yeah,
yeah.
the globalist agenda transcends Hillary. I mean, she was obviously a focal point for it, but this is coming from people like George Soros, and I would not be surprised if Bill Gates is a globalist as well. They want just one big planet of commerce, and it'll be history's worst dictatorship. And it's also very unsafe to not have fireproof doors in a building, watertight bulkheads in a ship, borders around nations. It's just common sense. But they're still pushing that agenda, and they're using the United Nations to give it a sort of a quasi-legal feel to what's going on, and doing most of the conquering using America's military might.
Yeah, that's why they have no problem with the immigration thing, because to them, the concept of American citizen no longer applies. It's global citizen in their mind. That's why it's, in their mind, their conscience, they actually think they're doing the right thing. And
well,
they don't have to worry about breaking laws.
They're doing the right thing. The problem is that they're thinking entirely in terms of their fantasies of what could be, and they're not looking around to see the real world effects of what they've done. And again, liberalism is based on this false idea that you can re-engineer how people think by changing the environment around them. And that goes all the way back to Margaret Mead and Coming of Age in Samoa, which was an intellectual hoax. And yet it became the guiding philosophy of the liberalist movement. And that's why so many of these things liberals do don't work out. They still think that everything that we think is the result of the environment. They refuse to accept that we actually inherit some of our basic behaviors and thoughts and instincts. Anyway, listen, Curtis, I got to let you go. We've got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. So to finish up on this story, Ted Cruz basically lobbed a cruise missile at social media during a recent Senate hearing, basically chastising them for the very overt political bias on their platforms and the political targeting and censorship that's going on. And apparently he was inspired to do so by this Project Veritas undercover video that came on out, where one of the employees of social media was just caught effectively bragging about, wow, we shut down those conservatives. And basically, there is a problem there. There is a problem there. Now, here are the numbers. Twitter hid 48% of tweets using the DNC leak hashtag and 25% of the tweets using Podesta emails during the 2016 election. Now that is meddling, and that is bias. They were trying to protect Hillary and Podesta from exposure for what they had done. Now, Elon Musk is an interesting guy, and I'd like to know a little bit more about him. But he's come on out. He is very concerned about the emergence of true artificial intelligence. What we have now is getting closer, and everyone likes the phrase AI. It sounds, techie and up-to-date and modern. I don't think there are any machines out there yet that can pass the Turing test. But Elon is out there saying AI could eventually become very dangerous, and it needs to be regulated. He's saying that AI is much greater danger to the human race than nuclear warheads, because the nuclear warheads don't get used, except for those two the U.S. dropped on Japan. Now, Elon may have reason to be concerned, and I tend to agree with him. I think the fact that our economy is already controlled by computers is very destabilizing. We've lost control of our economy because we're not controlling the economy anymore. These high-speed computers are. And the management of these companies that own these computers may see themselves as very powerful, but the reality is they're along for the ride. They don't know what's going on inside those machines. They really, really don't. Now, believe it or not, this whole topic of AI and needing regulation and protection was covered in a science fiction novel. It's actually one of my favorites, called Neuromancer, written by William Gibson. He wrote a whole bunch of books about this future world in which we're all plugged into computer, or we can plug into computers directly. Just little jack behind the ear, you plug in a cable, and your eye sees what the computer wants you to see. And Neuromancer was specifically about an AI trying to break free of its electronic chains. And I'm not going to give away the ending, but it's a good read. I'm sure your local library has it, maybe a used bookstore. It was printed, long ago, back in, I think, the very early 90s here. Now, another area of concern, and I'm sensitive to this because Claire and I bought this replacement Hyundai for our Honda. Auto manufacturers are asleep at the wheel when it comes to security. This is coming out of the register in the United Kingdom. And it says that cars are getting smarter every year, but their increasing computational power isn't being backed up by good IT security practices. And apparently it is considered child's play to hack into these car systems. Now, Claire and I don't have to worry about that. Our car does not have Bluetooth. It doesn't have automatic parking. It doesn't have the big touch screen. I went old tech, buttons that I can feel with my fingers. I mean, there are some display screens. There's one for the radio, and there's a little informational panel between the tachometer and the speedometer that tells me things like gas and whatnot. But these high-end cars that have Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, and they hook into the telephone systems, they're wide open to hacking. And I know a lot of people are concerned that this may be how Michael Hastings was killed, because he had a high-end car, and witnesses said he was just driving down the road, and all of a sudden the car just took off, accelerated, and then swerved into a tree. And a lot of these university computer departments have already demonstrated that you can, in fact, take over a car's functions remotely. If there's any kind of a radio link in there, they can get in. And it's very, very easy to do. And cars that have the automatic parking, they can literally take the steering away from you. So until they address those issues, my advice would be not to get a car with all the bells and whistles. For one thing, it's a distraction. You know, when you're driving, you want to look at the road, you want to be focused on getting where you're going and not being distracted by all kinds of bells and whistles. And maybe I'm just showing my age here, but I do think that all those extra little bits of tech are a distraction, and they make driving a little bit more dangerous. Now, if you've been hit by ransomware, and a lot of us have, apparently paying the ransom doesn't always get you your data back. Somebody did a survey of 1,200 IT security practitioners and decision makers from 17 countries, and it basically found that only half the people who fell victim to ransomware last year were able to recover their files after paying the ransom demand. So, good reason to maintain constant, steady backups. Back up your data all the time. Set up an automated system. Now, Kaspersky Lab has come on out, and they're looking at this Olympic Destroy malware. And at first glance, it looks exactly the same as the Lazarus Group wiper used in the Blue Noroff malware responsible for the $81 million cyber heist against the Central Bank of Bangladesh, even down to the header. But Kaspersky has determined that it's a frame-up job. They're saying 100% confidence the attribution to Lazarus is false. And the way they figured that out is apparently they found indications that the Olympic Destroyer was developed using Visual Studio 10 and then made to look as though the code was the same C++ written Blue Noroff. Now that's high-end stuff there. Somebody set up a frame job. And that's what makes it really difficult to say Russia hacked the elections. You don't know. I mean, even the company that originally said we think it was Russia, they backed off it when they got criticized by other security companies for saying your methods are sloppy. You're making all these assumptions. You don't know what's going on. Now, last week we were running a couple of stories where This one doctor is out there saying that flu could mutate into a really lethal form with almost no warning and wipe out millions of people. And there was another story on the same theme, and I said, I'm really bothered by the fact that we're getting all of a sudden these scare stories about a coming pandemic. And my fear level has gone up again because Dr. Tedros Adhanom, Director General for the World Health Organization, has said the next outbreak that hits us will be a terrible one, causing huge amounts of death all over the world. Fears of a pandemic have been hovering after the worst flu outbreak in recent years devastated Australia, France, United Kingdom, and United States. Plus, they're still talking about the Zika virus and claiming it can cause microcephaly. Actually, where the microcephaly first broke out in Brazil, they've had Zika there for 60 years. Never caused a problem before. What they did have that was brand new was trials of yet another vaccine. Now remember, we linked to this story. Believe it or not, the CDC, scientists went up way in the north to the frozen Arctic, and they dug up known bodies of people who died from the sadly misnamed Spanish flu. And they recovered bits and snippets of the virus, and CDC actually recreated that virus. Now, given that today's population are basically descended from people who survived the Spanish flu, you have to wonder what purpose they might have in doing that. And then all of a sudden we're getting all these stories about, oh, there's a big pandemic coming. Remember the When Pigs Fly flu, 2009, same thing. Oh, there's a big one coming. I saw this article in National Geographic. Say, there's a super disease coming. It's going to wipe out a huge portion of the population of Earth. Didn't happen. I'm sure there are people who'd like it to happen. Bill Gates is a big, fan of population reduction. He's made his money off of all of us. He's probably sick and tired of all our complaining about Windows. Yeah, just get rid of them. Now, story out of WorldNet Daily is reporting on a report, a research project on antidepressants published in The Lancet. And they go on to laud the prestigious Oxford authors. Basically, what this report says is that millions more people should be taking antidepressants, and that holding back is like denying needed treatment to patients with hypertension or cancer. And the lead researcher says he's very excited about the study's results and boldly declares the final answer has been found regarding antidepressants' effectiveness. This is obviously an industry puff piece. We know there are problems with antidepressants. It's been well documented. But they're out there with this report. I mean, the corporate media has gone wild over this thing. Oh, yes, doctors, just prescribe antidepressants. They'll fix everything. They may even be thinking about making it mandatory like vaccinations. I absolutely will not take those medications because the last time I did, bad things happened. And of course, if we're all taking these antidepressants, then that gives the government an excuse to take away our guns. They're using the pills to confiscate the guns. The correlation between psychiatric drugs and random acts of violence and homicide is well documented. The Food and Drug Administration requires black box warnings on the inserts of psychotropic drugs with regard to their relationship to violent behavior. They actually admit it on the package insert. That's why you got to ask the doctor when he's recommending a medication. You want to see that package insert. If the doctor doesn't have it, you ask the pharmacist for it. Or you go over to the FDI's website because they have a searchable database. You can look up the medications before you take them. So the FDA acknowledges there is a link between these prescription psychiatric medications and violent behavior and homicide. And yet, what do we get from the government? Oh, it's the guns. The guns are the problem. We got to take away all the guns. If you look at the total number of shooters that have been held up by the media, it's what, a dozen? If you want to deal with that dozen, please do. I get sick and tired of how every time some Muslim commits an act of terror, we're told, don't blame all Muslims, it's just this one bad guy. When do gun owners get that same break? Every time there's a shooting anywhere, immediately, oh, take away all the guns, take away all the guns. Only the police should have guns. The police never show up in time. They just don't. Prove that in Parkland. The police were completely and utterly useless. If only somebody in that school had a gun. Now that's assuming that it was just this one kid, as opposed to apparently 3 black-clad shooters staging this up. Now, there's been a development about that, the veterans' home up in California in Napa County, and it turns out the shooter was a former patient. Now, this facility, it's the largest veterans facility in the country, and it specializes in treating PTSD and trying to reintegrate these veterans, at least the younger ones, back into society. And apparently, this guy had been kicked out of the veterans' home just a few days before he went on the rampage. So this one is actually looking legit. Unfortunately, 3 people did die. But again, it wasn't the gun. It's what the government put this guy through in the war zone. The government did it to all those people in that veterans' home. Between the basic training and the war experience, it messes people up. Plus, they hand out antidepressants over there like they're M&Ms. We had a veteran call into the show when we were talking about this the last time and said, yeah, the Defense Department is spending more on antidepressants than they are on Black Hawk helicopters. Keep all these people really doped up the whole time so that they can perform. And of course, when they come on home, they're addicted. If they try and get off, bad things can happen. Now, there's another article. This one came out of Blacklisted News. It's talking about the deeper reason for drug ads on television. The United States is one of the very few countries that allow advertisements for prescription medication on television. They're going to show you a wonderful person having a wonderful life in the hope that you'll go to your doctor and say, I want to try that. I want to be like that person in the commercial. And of course, then there's that very fast voice at the end telling you about all the really terrible things this drug might actually do to you, including kill you. Now, pharmaceutical corporations spend huge amounts of money on these commercials. And one of the reasons they do that is saturation advertising, to get people to go to their doctors and say, give me this. And the doctor will say, oh, okay, sure, why not? But the other reason is corporate media is dependent on that volume of cash coming from the pharmaceutical corporations. And that's why you will never see any news on corporate media that is critical of vaccines, that is critical of the pharmaceutical industry as a whole. They're spending that ad money to control the news. And that's actually what they want to do. Monsanto does the same thing. That's how they were able to go into California. Remember Prop 37, I think it was, about the GMO labeling? And they went to all the radio and TV stations and newspapers and said, you will editorialize against mandatory GMO labeling or we'll pull our ads from your rag. And the corporate media just rolled over and said, absolutely, absolutely. All right, we're going to take another break here for commercials. Do join us on the air, 800-313-9443, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, coming up on the top of the hour. Now, as you know, they're having these horrendous storms all over the eastern seaboard. There's another one coming in. Huge amounts of snow. When the snow melts later in the spring, it runs off. And there's a concern growing about how the pollution that we have showered ourselves in is being picked up by the runoff water and carried into the ocean. That's been known for a very, very long time. But now they're concerned about some of the more exotic chemicals and even medications that are in that runoff water And according to this article over, well, it was referenced from Investment Watch blog, it appears to be compromising the immune systems of fish, damaging their ability to survive. And we've been seeing these stories recently about these strange fish die-offs all along our coasts, along the western coast. It was assumed it might be radiation from Fukushima. Around the Gulf of Mexico, it's assumed it's the leftovers from the Gulf oil disaster. But nobody really had a good handle on the fish die-offs they're seeing in the Atlantic. And it may just be that we have toxified the landmass to such an extent that it too is killing off sea life. And that's a very, very dangerous thing. We depend on the ocean for food. It's already being overfished. A lot of countries are now imposing serious restrictions to prevent the waters from being fished to emptiness, because that would start a collapse of the food chain here. Speaking of water, story that came out of Natural Blaze, talking about how in northern Minnesota, their water resources are being endangered. And apparently, it has to do with mining interests coming on in that are producing toxic byproducts of the mining operation. And it's starting to get into the soil, air, groundwater, nearby aquifers, lakes, and downstream rivers. And people are dependent on that. The attitude of government and corporations towards ordinary people is terrifying. They simply don't care. Look at all those poor people living downstream of the Hanford radioactive waste site. Over the weekend, I put up a link to a website over in Indiana, where apparently Kellogg Brown Root is getting ready to put in a coal to diesel conversion plant. It's going to be huge. They're going to be sucking water out of the Ohio River and just dumping the contaminated wastewater back in. And unfortunately, because of Kellogg Brown Root's political connections, they're probably going to succeed in getting this despite some very intense public opposition. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And let's see what we've got here. We're talking about the water pollution in northern Minnesota. And by the way, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. There is a major lawsuit that is underway here in the United States, and it's over the issue of water fluoridation, artificial water fluoridation. There's actually a tiny bit of natural fluoride in most well water, but we're talking about the intense artificial addition of fluoride, supposedly on the claim that it would prevent tooth decay, which over the years it's been found it didn't actually do that. In fact, in many cases, it actually turned people's teeth brown. But fluoride is a known neurotoxin, and the Fluoride Action Network, along with a coalition of other groups, has filed a complaint in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California against the Environmental Protection Agency in response to their denial of a petition under Section 21 of the Toxic Substances Control Act seeking a ban on water fluoridation. And we see this all the time. The agencies of government that are supposed to be taking care of us are actually on the sides of the corporations. The Gulf oil disaster was caused in part by the Minerals Management Service just looking the other way for 4 years, while the manual blowout preventer was way overdue for mandated maintenance. Or how the Securities Exchange Commission looked the other way when Bernie Madoff was running his Ponzi scheme. These government agencies are not doing the work of the American people. They're fully in bed with the corporations, and that right there is the classic definition of fascism. Governmental and corporate power aligned together against the general population. All right, we have a caller on the line here, Terry in California. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, just an example of disarming the population was demonstrated last week in Cambodia, a country 25 years ago. And he thinks he owns the whole country and everybody in it. And he can sell off assets of the country and put it in his own bank account. Recently, just last week, he sold square miles, actually sold a lease on square miles of land out by the Vietnamese border to Vietnam. And they want to get all the indigenous people off that land that was theirs. They've been living there for generations. And these people came out and protested, and sent 150 soldiers out there and confronted them and opened fire on the crowd that was protesting.
Yeah.
And when they turned around to run away, they shot them in the back. And that's just typical. You know, they recently also, a few months ago, attacked a radio host that was critical of the government. And people are getting wise over there. 1 million people showed up for his funeral. So that's what happens when nobody's got a gun to fight back.
Yes. Same thing happened under Pol Pot. With all the atrocities that he committed, and the Cambodian people couldn't fight back because they'd been disarmed. In fact, every single genocide of the 20th century was preceded by a gun ban on the targeted population. And here in the United States right now, it appears that the targeted population is straight white males.
Yeah, and what happened was on that deal with Pol Pot, I think that people were disarmed before that. Because Prince Sihanouk, they're paranoid about losing their power. So they just go in and disarm everybody, and then they can't have a revolution. And then Pol Pot took over, and, that's what they were already disarmed. So they couldn't stop him either, of course, So anyway, it's something for people to think about. That could happen easily, when you got no sense of retaliation. There's no method of retaliation.
Well, that was the reason the Founding Fathers gave us the Second Amendment, recognizing our right to have arms. It wasn't about hunting. It wasn't about defending your home. Those were given back when the Constitution was being written. What they're talking about here is, holding abusive government in check. I mean, the whole revolution began with Britain's attempt to seize the stockpiled military weapons of the colonists. It's what led to the battles of Lexington and Concord.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so, a lot of there's a lot of paranoid leaders out there, and, most of the countries already passed that gun ban, and we might be one of the last ones. We got to hang on to it because, there's so many examples out there like the ones you cited. And something else, one way to tell if these school shootings are false flag or not, just look at the what happens afterwards. Like you mentioned, all 22 cameras were confiscated by the sheriff, and he's the one that was promoting gun control. And, when there's a cover-up afterwards, that's, a red flag that the whole thing was staged in the beginning.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, Mike, thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot. I mean, these days, the safe assumption, when you see anything a politician is saying or anything on the corporate media, the safe assumption is we're being lied to again. And then figure out what the lie is designed to generate. What result are they trying to get from it? Obviously, in the case of the staged false flag shootings, it's to get you to just say, please take my guns. I can't share the collective guilt any longer. We're going to do a shout out now to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And before we take this next phone call, just a list of what happened here. Basically, last century, again, the Armenian genocide was preceded with the gun ban. Soviet Union under Stalin basically banned guns for anti-communist and anti-Stalinists. We know that Nazi Germany disarmed their people, and look at the bad things that happened there. China banned guns for the anti-communists, killed 20 million of them. Guatemala instituted a gun ban against the Mayan Indians, killed 100,000 of them. Uganda disarmed the Christians. 300,000 died in that. And Cambodia basically targeted educated persons. They targeted their own intellectuals, people with education. 1 million. All right, let's go back to the phones here. Dennis in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Hi, Mike. You know, my son became a Marine, and he was stateside, and I had thought that he was in a safe place for some time. I actually had a conversation in a bar in Connecticut, a tiki bar, with two guys that were admittedly NSA employees of the National Security Administration. And they had told me how the unit he belonged to was the oldest Marine unit in existence, one that was not burnt down when they invaded our capital, War of 1812, you know. Now, here's the funny thing about it, though. But you talk about the pharmaceuticals. I remember reading about it years ago, how they were using them like poker chips in the, poker games, the medications, because they had 180 days worth of meds.
Yep.
And by the same token, we have a school shooting. They want to put security guards, or security around the school perimeter, and they talk about using military veterans, which are veterans today, are all PTSD, and I can see only bad things happening in that respect. I know more vets that are talking about PTSD, and I actually had a girlfriend that her job was to ferret out the fakers down at Fort Polk, down in Louisiana, when he came back stateside. So there's that's a double-edged sword we're looking at here.
Yeah.
But not only that, it plays right into their hands with them giving the drugs to the soldiers, to the people online, on TV, advertised, and yet using it to take away our guns.
Yes.
And I'm going to have a T-shirt printed up this week that's going to say, if guns kill people, cars drive drunk.
Yes. That's a good one.
Like, they don't want anybody armed to face off with them because, to be quite frank, I recently became aware of the fact that some of the stuff I have, they talk about armor piercing, level 3 armor.
Yes.
A Makarov round will go through a steel helmet.
Yes.
And it'll go through a level, class 3 armor. I think they're scared to death that even with their armor on, these guys, all you need is one guy with a pistol and knows how, not even a rifle, with that kind of a pistol, can take down some of these assassins that we have out there.
Yes.
I believe that incident went rogue in Florida. Anyway, thanks for letting me sound off, Mike. I just wanted to get that out.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. And getting on back to the news here, there is a winter storm watch today going on into tomorrow. I've been trading emails and messages with my family in New England. They haven't been hit by it all that much because it's mostly down on the coasts, and my relatives are well inland. But this is a classic New England snowstorm. They're predicting another 12 inches of snow, and it's going to just seriously jam up Boston, which is really not laid out to deal with heavy winter snow, because when Boston was laid out, you got through the snow on a horse. Now, there's an article that came out from a newkindofhuman.com, and it's talking about how science is being manipulated to deceive the public. Now, there was a study published in the Public Library of Science Journal that found up to 72% of scientists admitted their colleagues were engaged in questionable research practices, and that just over 14% of them were engaged in outright falsification. Between 1977 and 1990, the FDA found scientific flaws in 10 to 20% of all the studies they audited, and they didn't audit them all. Scientists at the Thousand Oaks biotech firm Amgen set out to double-check the results of 53 landmark published studies in their fields of cancer research and blood biology. What they found was shocking. Only 6 of the 53 studies could be proven valid. That meant almost 90% of them were flawed, yet passed off to the public as fact. In other words, there's a lot of scientific bovine excrement floating around. Now, the reason is very simple. In the good old days, the rulers would tell the priests, get the people to do what I want, tell them it's God's will. And the priest would say, yes, sir. And they would go into the congregation and say, you should do this. It's God's will. This is God's appointed servant on the planet. Well, we're kind of away from that kind of primitive thinking these days. We no longer believe that our rulers are put in place by any kind of a deity. Religion as a whole is actually on decline, and I'm sure all these pedophilia scandals aren't helping. So the rulers have decided, well, we'll just use the scientists. You offer a scientist enough money, and yeah, they'll say whatever you want them to say. It's called the golden rule of science. Whoever's got the gold determines the science. And we've certainly seen it with human-caused global warming. So instead of a priest in the robes holding a Bible, you now have a scientist dressed in a white lab coat holding a clipboard saying, do this, the science is settled. We know how this is going to work. It's all going to work out well. And obviously we can see that the scientists who claimed that humans were warming the planet were seriously wrong. They were being paid by Al Gore and his associates to create an artificial need for carbon credits, off of which Al Gore was going to become the world's first carbon billionaire. That's all it was. It was a scam. And yes, individual scientists will sell out. That's why we rely on scientific method and reproducibility to determine what's true and what's false. Science makes goofs. Science never claimed to be perfect the way religion did. I mean, think about the theory of epicycles. They held on to that one for 400 years. That's science's longest running goof in history. Now, here's another one where somebody may have bought the science. It turns out saturated fat and cholesterol are important parts of a healthy diet. This is coming out of Mercola.com. Now, saturated fat and cholesterol have been vilified as the culprits of heart disease for more than 6 decades, spurred on by companies that were selling what was supposedly heart-healthy substitutes. And research has identified refined carbs, sugar, and trans fats found in the processed food as the real enemy. So once again, the science was wrong, or the science was deliberately skewed. I remember one time when I was still working in advertising, I saw this amazing commercial. It was from the Mars Candy Company, in which they had this dietitian say that eating this candy bar was good, healthy eating for lunchtime, with a straight face. And I guess the public reaction against that one must have been extreme laughter, because I only saw it once. It was yanked off the air. But I mean, that's how weird it is. Now, let's talk about China. As you know, China has a space station in orbit, but not for much longer. And it's the Tiangong-1 Space Lab. It's 8.5 tons. And it's now expected to fall back to Earth somewhere between March 24th and April 19th. And its orbit is highly inclined to the equator. So there's a lot of territory underneath that may have a bullseye on it. So we're hoping it comes down in the ocean. And we're hoping that nobody gets hit. Because if that comes down in a dense urban area, it's going to be huge amounts of destruction. By the way, they had another giant meteor come down over Russia over the weekend. Of course, Russia's really big. That's why they're seeing all these meteors. But people over in Russia tend to have security cameras and cameras in their car, and that's why they're catching these. This one appears not to have struck the ground, didn't produce the shock wave that we saw that really big one a couple of years ago. But yeah, somebody's throwing rocks at us out there. Well, look at how we're behaving. No wonder. The European Space Agency has test-fired a radical, what they describe as air-breathing ion thruster that could keep satellites in low orbit for years without propellant. And basically, it's loosely based on a concept called the Broussard ramjet, where it's actually drawing its propellant from the very thin air at the upper layers of the atmosphere. And it basically draws it on in, it heats it, it expands it out the back, they get thrust. Now, it won't work in an absolutely pure vacuum, but anywhere there's any kind of trace gas and dust, this thing can generate thrust. And the experts are saying it could be used on the edge of any planet's atmospheres. Near Mars, it could draw carbon dioxide into the thruster. Now, what they're describing here is actually very simple, or very similar to what Putin described as this small nuclear heating unit behind their ramjet. So it's not exactly a unique idea. In fact, the U.S. actually tried a nuclear fission engine. I think it was called Project Orion, and this was back in the 1950s, I think. And they stopped work on it. This was before the space age, where you could put these things out in space where they wouldn't hurt anybody, because apparently this engine was just showering the ground behind it, under it, with lots and lots of radioactivity. So good for the European Space Agency. They're starting to make progress. We need to get our space program back on track. It's been sitting idle for years. I mean, they've done some good things, but mostly they've been here to rubber stamp human-caused global warming. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Just handling some email. Now, if you're a fan of the James Bond movies, and I am, the first ones were really good. Then they got kind of campy, and I lost interest. Now that Daniel Lewis is in the lead role, they seem to be doing very well. But I understand he's getting tired of it, and he's about to move on here. If you remember the movie, You Only Live Twice, the story was centered on this hollowed-out volcano in Japan, which concealed Blofeld's secret missile base from which he would launch spacecraft to steal other people's spacecraft, to try and goad the U.S. and the Soviet Union into a war for the benefit of China. And when they were on location in Japan, the volcano they used is called Shinmodaki, and it's erupted again. And it's causing cancellations of flights after ash reached 3,650 meters. This is apparently the peak's strongest eruption in 7 years. It had been thought to be dormant, and then it started erupting, and people were joking that, you know, James Bond had destroyed Blofeld's lair, even though in the movie Blofeld blows it up himself. A lot of geological activity going on right now. They had a really big quake down in Papua New Guinea, lots of heavy aftershocks. The locals are trying to say it's because of the presence of American oil companies. And so there's a big stink brewing over that. Story that came out of Investor Discussion Board talking about heat anomalies in the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico. And people apparently are reporting there are bubbles coming up out of the water in parts of the Caribbean, and apparently it's also heating up in that same area. You can tell with satellite thermal data. Well, it seems to me like there's some kind of an underwater thermal event. Could be an ordinary thermal event or a large cluster of thermal vents. It could be a true underwater volcano. These things are down there. And sometimes they erupt and sometimes they don't. Now, according to this article that came out of Ice Age Now, there are as many as 10 million underwater volcanoes. Now, that's just a guess. Nobody really knows. when I was researching the link between those underwater volcanoes and the El Nino, the underwater maps I was able to get my hands on, there are amazing numbers of volcanoes there. And of course, some of them break the top of the ocean. That's how Hawaii got formed. But you're talking about volcanoes erupting, putting basically 2,200 degree hot lava into the water. Nobody knows how many, which is why all of these human-caused global warming people who are saying that human activity is warming the ocean, thus and such, they don't really know. If you don't know the volume of lava that is pouring into the ocean, you can't subtract it out from the ocean temperature model. And you have to be able to get that factor out if you're really genuinely going to show that human activity is warming the ocean. It's another reason why we know this human-caused global warming was a scam. They wanted to make money. They wanted to sell carbon credits. They wanted to hit you with a carbon tax. And everybody who hopped on board with this with Al Gore, they're scrambling now. We've had several record-setting winters in a row. This last winter, we set all-time cold temperature records. They tried to bring back that idea that global warming is what causes the cold weather, which never really made sense. It's thermodynamically impossible. I'll tell you what, take a pan of water, put it on the stove on low heat. When it freezes over, you get back to me. So that earlier article is correct. There's a lot of scientific bovine excrement that's out there that's being used to trick you, to manipulate you, to get you to do things you otherwise would not do, to sell you products, to sell you policy. You shouldn't believe somebody just because they're a scientist any more than you should believe somebody just because they're a priest or a politician. Individual human beings, sadly, are corruptible. That's the reality. Everybody's got a price. So you need to become your own best analysts. And I think one of the reasons that the sciences were de-emphasized under Common Core was so that people wouldn't have the skills to realize when some guy in a white lab coat was feeding them a line. The dumbing down of a generation. And because of that dumbed down generation, we don't have the talent pool we need to have to rebuild our manufacturing. This government has really messed up this country. And it was all because of very short-sighted policy. We need to do this now, and to heck with the long-term events. Well, all the long-term events are catching up with us now. And we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, earlier I mentioned in the context of individual people are corruptible, priests, and apparently there is a big stink happening over at the Vatican where this male escort basically submitted a 1,200-page dossier containing the names of 34 actively gay priests and 6 seminarians in Italy, and basically sent it to the Vatican from the Archdiocese of Naples. And the allegations were compiled by Francesco Mancicapra, a gay male escort who told local media that he couldn't put up with the priests' hypocrisy any longer, because they would get up there in church and they would preach celibacy for unmarried people, and I don't know if the Roman Catholics are on the gays the way that some of our more fundamentalist Christians are in this country, but they were being hypocritical. And there does seem to be a major problem in the church where they're saying one thing and they're doing something else. In fact, I remember a story, and this is years and years and years ago, when Claire and I were living in Washington State. And she had started a church choir at this church. I don't even remember the denomination. And the pastor of the church found out that I had a home full of computers and some knowledge. And so one day he calls and says, "Would you come over and help me fix my computer. So I go on over to the church office, and it's just the two of us, and we're just talking the way guys do while I'm basically just cleaning out his computer. Cleaning the contacts is all it took. And he starts talking about how beautiful and attractive my wife is. And I got like really weirded out because he wasn't sounding very churchy at that particular moment. I don't want to go into the details here. Ultimately, he left the cloth and went to do something else. But there is this huge problem. And I know the Catholics seem to have the most of it because of the not being allowed to be married. But it's hit other religions as well. And we put that all up there because this male escort is right. It is hypocritical. These people should not be up there representing themselves as a moral authority when they themselves are behaving so immorally. Now, we have a caller on the line, Errol in the Netherlands. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, hello, Mike. Today, HLEG, so HLEG, it's a final report of the high-level expert group on fake news and online disinformation.
Yes.
From the EU. So I mailed this to you, and I was studying. I was studying the participants, also the members, the 39 members that were selected to analyze and research the information. So I put that on my YouTube site with a link. So as a creator, you can put a link in it. So I wanted to make a comment under my official video, another just a comment in your comment section. So I was putting it there, and then I logged out. So I was logging out, and then I tried to. I was going again to my channel to check it out. So the HLEG. I was checking it out. I couldn't see my own comment. I was like, "Wow, this is
it's really out there." I mean, they are really trying to silence conservative voices, and obviously they're doing it for two reasons. One, they want only the liberal point of view out there for the public to see between now and the November elections. And of course, they're concerned about more and more people coming to suspect that there is more to the Clinton crimes than we've already been told. And people are starting to wonder, and they're starting to investigate.
Yeah, but what I wanted to say to you is I made an official comment with the EU link, the website from the EU, with no fake news of whatever. I just put a link with my name was it, of course, my channel. I put a link with information. These are the 39 high-level expert groups on fake news and disinformation. So you could see the list of those people. I could not see it when I logged out. So it was like, wow, this is amazing, man. Because it was official. It was an official post. It was not. I was not bashing anybody. Whatever. I was the first one on my own channel who put it there. So when I logged out and checked it again, when I logged off, because I always checked it, I could not see it. And then I checked it by all the channels. I cannot see my own comments when I log out.
Well, so you've obviously been flagged.
Yeah, but I have no email. They don't send me an email. I have no information. Whatever. This is very interesting. So keep that in mind.
Okay.
I checked this out. I can make a clip of that. I have Wireshark. You know Wireshark with all the information, all the data.
Yes.
I record everything, so I can check everything. I have it black and white. You know black and white on paper. I can show you this has happened. You can see it here, then you can see it. So I got it in my pocket. Thank you for my call, Mike.
All right. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now, I'm going to back up a little bit to current events here because I was waiting to see what was going to come out on this story. But as you know, this morning in Austin, Texas, 2 package bombs went off, and police are now saying they think it's linked to a bomb that was used to kill somebody on March 2nd. And they're saying that the victims are all black, and they think the motive for these attacks might be race. Somewhat different story over on InfoWars, asking if maybe Antifa is responsible for the bombings to generate sympathy for themselves and their cause. False flag. But it's certainly going to fan up racial tensions yet again. Now, I'm not sure I agree with this. And again, I come from a family of hunters. I've hunted myself in the past. You know, I used the animal. I tanned the hide. I ate the meat. And I mounted the head. Claire made me throw it away. But I grew out of that. It's a nice skill to have if you need it, but there's not much to hunt here in Hawaii anyway, except the wild boar. And at least on this island, you have to hunt with a bow and arrow, which I know how to use. I was on my archery team in college. But the Trump administration has basically decided that it's going to be okay to allow Americans to import body parts of African elephants shot for sport. And apparently, Trump personally intervened in November when the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service first said it would lift an Obama-era ban on elephants imported from Zimbabwe and Zambia. Now, the people in Zimbabwe and Zambia are basically running an operation where they're trying to self-fund taking care of these dwindling herds by allowing a few of them to be hunted in these very expensive private hunting clubs. And it's very difficult. If you've ever seen the movie on Jane Goodall, Sigourney Weaver played it. And there's part of the story about the same thing. They're selling one of the baby gorillas to get the money to keep funding the operation. It's a very difficult decision to make. I understand some members of Trump's family like to hunt big game. I do my hunting with a telephoto lens. And my thinking is if you're close enough to get the shot, the picture, you're close enough to make the kill. But you don't have to, unless you need to. Obviously, if you're hunting for food, that's a completely different story. But sport hunting, do that with a camera and a telephoto lens. All right, let's go back to the phones here. Sherry in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thanks, Mike. I have an extra hour of your show now. RBN's getting their act together. They've tried everything, and now they're kind of settling down, and I may have to give to them more.
Yes,
I think
that
they're
would
doing
help.
really well.
That would help.
Yes.
Otherwise, we're going to have to sell the hamster to a fur coat company.
In my opinion, since regarding the church problems, that the way of the world is our way, but if it were God's way, nothing of disaster would be natural. Now, having had my little say on that, because I always thought that was kind of neat. When Catholics go astray, like they do sometimes, because this is the world, they become Episcopalians. And this is what's nice about this church, because I like the Catholic Church and my church both, because they can marry here. And
Yes.
Religion is a worldly thing, but we like to worship what we intrinsically know is there. For those who feel that it's there, who have an experience, they want to worship it. Even the most primitive societies, before they knew there were any other societies on earth, have wanted to worship what they have a feeling is there that's greater than they are. And so it's a worldly thing. Religion is a worldly thing. And hey, Catholics, you know, I go to your church once in a while so I can be blessed. I go to my church so I can receive what to me is what you Catholics, well, I won't go into it. I think the Catholics have the right idea about the communion. It does feel like you're really participating in something that's special. And I'm just saying that. That's all I have to say.
Okay.
That welcome to our church. If you want to get married, come over to the Episcopal side. It's just like the Catholic in English.
Are they still the Catholics still doing Latin? I mean,
No,
I haven't been in a Catholic church in a long time.
Yeah, I think it has to be a very high mass to do Latin now.
Oh, okay.
I think I've been out of the loop for a while on the Catholic Church.
Me too.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
all right,
thank
Sherry,
you, Mike.
thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here.
Yeah.
Going to get on back here and do some news here. Wow, there's another story. About a global pandemic coming. This is actually coming from the World Health Organization, highlighted the potential danger of a deadly, as yet unknown pathogen. It's like they're ramping us up for a massive depopulation, as if the World War wouldn't do it. In fact, have you ever noticed the weird thing about how World War I killed a lot of people? That trench warfare almost seemed designed to kill the maximum number of people with the minimum damage to the real estate. Just cross machine guns, make a charge, cross no man lands, everybody falls down. It's a dumb way to fight a war. And then the war ended, and it's like somebody said, we still have too many people. And all of a sudden, that Spanish flu just shows up. And by the way, it shouldn't be called the Spanish flu. It didn't originate in Spain. It originated on a U.S. military base, Camp Funston. All right, let's take another phone call. Jeff in Georgia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, good to talk to you, Mike. You mentioned Larry Klayman earlier to lead the Justice Department, and you mentioned him before. I looked him up. Would like to ask a question. Larry Klayman may be nothing but controlled opposition, much like Mark Lane was to Kennedy researchers. And it's very difficult sometimes to spot controlled opposition because it's such a highly intelligent manner of deceit. Almost every lawsuit Klayman has taken up would seem to be a good cause, and he's taken up many, but almost all have been dismissed. In short, he got nothing done. I see nothing against our illegal wars he's taken up, no class action lawsuits on behalf of middle class against sanctuary cities, no class action lawsuits against people trying to shut down our free speech.
Let me cut in here. I mean, Larry Klayman, his target has always been political corruption. He was the founder of Judicial Watch. Now he's founded the new organization Freedom Watch, and Tom Fitton has taken over Judicial Watch. But their focus is political corruption. And one of the reasons some of their cases get dismissed is they get assigned to judges who were appointed by the very people that Larry Klayman is trying to investigate. Remember that Klayman filed a lawsuit regarding the election fraud, and it got thrown out of court by a Clinton-appointed judge who didn't even read the case, just said it's dismissed, it's gone. So it's not so much Larry Klayman being controlled opposition, because he's been doing this for a long, long time. It's the fact that our judges are just as corrupt as the rest of the system.
But Mike, you know who Mark Lane was to the Kennedy researchers.
Yes.
It took 50 years for me to realize Mark Lane was controlled opposition. Until he wrote his third book, you realize the things he wrote in his third book he didn't write in his first two. And you've seen how he hijacked the House Special Committee of Assassinations, and how he undermined Jim Garrison's investigation because he was right there with him for 2 years. All I'm saying is that if you appointed Klayman to replace Sessions, you would have Klayman and you would have Rosenstein. Rosenstein appointed one of the deep state, Robert Mueller, who's nothing but a stealthy.
I understand that. I'd like to see Rosenstein gone along with Sessions. But I think, based on his history, I think Klayman would be a good choice for an attorney general. Anyway, I need to let you go. We're almost at the end of the show, and I got 2 more calls to get to. We're going to start with William in Texas. And William, I'm going to have to take you through the commercial break, but what's on your mind?
Yeah, I was just calling to speak, make a few points about the Second Amendment, because the other day I was speaking with a person, and she was like, well, I don't see why people need AR-15s or assault style weapons and this and that. And I was like, well, you know, if martial law was to come, that we're at least kind of on the same ground. Like, it'll be a fair fight. You know what I mean?
Yes. That's why. That's why they want to take those guns away. They don't want a fair fight. They're doing to us what they did to these other countries. Disarm yourself. We promise we'll be good, and then they never are. All right, William. Thank you for the call. We're going to let you go. We're going to take one more call in our last segment after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to take one more phone call from Joe in California. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to say a couple of things. I didn't want to really dialogue back and forth. I just wanted to say some things that hit on some points that were addressed today.
Mm-hmm.
One of them was a caller about the Second Amendment and weapons and something, you know, as the weapons appear to be more sophisticated. It's because the war machine or the military-industrial complex has evolved itself, and aren't we under the Supreme Court allowed to have the same weapons authorized by the military or whatever?
Yeah, that was United States versus Miller, and apparently there was another Supreme Court decision, the one that reaffirmed that the Second Amendment is an individual right, and apparently in that decision as well, it basically said that the intent of the Second Amendment is that we be armed equally to the uniformed services. And again, it's all about giving government a reason to leave us alone.
Yeah, the key thing is shall not be infringed, and infringed is pretty clear. I know Obama did contract with his buddy from UBS Bank, who specializes in drones, and the drones are used to kill, and many times people will mention, I saw a drone, and then the news will try to cover it up. And Pelosi also said we should allow the killing of Americans by drones to remain secret and not told on the news. But
well, I can understand why they wouldn't want to tell that on the news. Where did you hear it, though?
You could just Google it. Pelosi says it's okay for the drones to be used on Americans and remain secret, and anyone could Google it and see it.
It doesn't mean that it's actually happened yet. Well, Pelosi says a lot of dumb stuff, you know.
Right.
But I'll take a look at that.
One of the things is, I wish I could take all the illegals home with me is another quote.
That was another good one. Yeah. What was that? Was it Pelosi or Feinstein who berated Trump for abusing these law-abiding illegal immigrants? That was a good one.
Well, as soon as you're Title VIII, you're immediately already breaking the law. So
yeah, that's it.
The Constitution. And the next thing is Promise Software, PROMIS, Promise Software.
Yeah.
And it's used against people like Judicial Watch. Anytime you try to get a day in court, the Promise software secretly runs behind all computer programming everywhere on this globe, and it makes sure that...
Okay, I need to cut you off here because we're almost out of time here. Promise was an issue. Promise was basically a database system that had a module that could read other remote databases, and that what made it a very powerful espionage and police tool. But it's way out of date. I'm sure they have other software. We need to let you go. In closing here, apparently the House Republicans have reached a conclusion on the Trump-Russia collusion. They're saying there's no evidence. Absolutely zero evidence. So it was a partisan witch hunt all along and remains so. And now, of course, Mueller is going to be out there trying to justify all the money that he spent and the fact that he just went completely off the rails. Now he's down there talking to Stormy Daniels, trying to create a crisis out of that. Anyway, there's the music. Time for me to get out of here. I got to do the Jim Goddard show in Vancouver. Well, actually, I'm going to be here. He's in Vancouver. Stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of wonderful things to share with you. Please take everything that you're learning here and at the whatreallyhappened.com website and share it with all your friends. Use the email. Everything else is being filtered heavily on social media. I wouldn't even waste my time with that anymore. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.